So there it is. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back for week 8 of 10. We only have 2 more. So of the AVCP Tribal Court Training Series, we're very happy to have everyone back for this session. My name is Denise Nerby. I was born and raised here in Bethel. My parents are Barbara and Carl Anvil Sr., and I'm the Tribal Justice Manager for AVCP. So starting off, as I have been, I just want to go over our housekeeping list. So these trainings are being recorded. They will be made available on the AVCP website at a later date. We are all placed on mute to begin with, and we ask that you remain on mute unless you're speaking, and to unmute yourself on the phone, press *6, or on the computer, click on the microphone button at the top right-hand area of your screen. Today's topic is tribal court orders and registering orders in state court, which will be presented to you by Clay Vanitas Fletcher, who is a staff attorney with Alaska Legal Services. Excuse me. Without any further hesitation, I am going to go ahead and share my screen and hand the time to you, Clay.
Alrighty, thanks, Denise. Hey, everyone. Yeah, my name is Clay Vanitas Fletcher, and I live and work in Fairbanks on the lower Tanana land. I'm in Fairbanks right now. It's quite cold. It's probably colder where a lot of you are calling in from. And I'm just so happy to be meeting with everybody. I'll be speaking on, as you can see in the title, registering tribal court decisions in Alaska State Court. And I want to let everybody get a chance to ask questions whenever you'd like, or also because we just have so much knowledge and experience here to chime in if you want to add something or disagree with something I'm saying, or provide more details on it. Please do. This is a topic that can be different depending on where you are in Alaska. So if you have a personal experience that differs from what I'm discussing, please speak up. It's good to hear. And a little bit more about me, just so you know, if it's helpful to you after this presentation. I'm an attorney. I work for Alaska Legal Services. And I can help tribes anywhere in the state with anything related to tribal courts, developing codes, getting orders enforced, just the general operation of a court, or anything else that relates to tribal court or even tribal government. So you'll see my contact information, my phone and my email at the end of this presentation, and you can feel free to reach out. We provide free legal services to any tribe that qualifies for our services, which basically means that a significant enough portion of your members have a very low income, because we're a free legal service for low-income Alaskans. So yeah, like I said, please reach out. I know that there are plenty of good resources on here, but I'm another one. I have the time and the energy to do it. So yeah, let's get into it. Registering tribal court decisions in Alaska State Court. Yeah, thanks. So the first question I'm posing is, what is registering and why do it? I think it's so important to be clear on this, because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what registering is. Registering, as you'll see under the what, all it means is that the Alaska State Court system is going to treat your tribal decision as its own. That would be the same as getting a state court decision. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, but I'll say it's similar to getting a state court decision from Washington State or Texas, and then asking the Alaska court to recognize it as their own. The next question is, why do it? there are many reasons to do it, and we'll get into those specifically, but at kind of a more general level, it's generally helpful to get help from the state, whether that means enforcement of the order, using the state's trooper or police force, or other help from the state for getting different documentation, birth certificates, IDs, benefits, PFD, etc. And that means working with the state's agencies and federal agencies like Health and Social Services, Vital Records, which is now called Health Analytics and Vital Records, the Internal Revenue Service, the Social Security Office. These are general reasons why it's helpful to register your tribal order with the state and have Alaska state system treating your order as its own. Okay, we can go next slide. Thanks. Now, I think this is equally important, this slide. What registering is not. Registering is absolutely, positively not required for the legitimacy of your tribal court order. Your order is a legitimate, legally binding decision of your tribe as a sovereign nation, completely on its own. It has its full legal effect on its own. Registering is never just required on its own. Registering that your order, your completely legally legitimate order, can merely be helpful to you as a tribe in getting the state or state agencies like Vital Records to work with you. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think that there tends to be a confusion, especially with the way the state government, the federal government, tribal governments work together on this one. And I think it's important to realize that it's just to get help from the state, because I see a world, I think everybody here is working for a world, I won't speak for everybody, but generally a world in which each tribe as a sovereign nation can do all of these things, has the resources to have a full tribal police force, has the resources to keep records, issue birth certificates, issue benefits on their own. And in that world, you wouldn't need the state's help so much. So I think it's important to remember that registering is just helpful for the tribe right now, so that the tribe can take advantage of the state's resources that it has and work with the state, just like nations work with each other throughout the world. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So the more specific question is, should the tribe do it? And this depends on what the tribe wants to get out of registering, what benefits it's going to get from the state. And that changes for each type of case. There is no general benefit to registering. It can be a very specific decision that the tribe can make based on what it needs in that moment for that type of case. And I'm going to talk about the most common types of cases: protective orders for domestic violence, child protection in state court known as child in need of aid cases, different things, adoptions, different things like that. I will go into each one in this presentation to describe what benefits you get from registering orders in those types of cases. And then I'll talk about how to do it for each one. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So, right, so I just had mentioned I'll be talking about how to do registering as well as why. So it's the why and the how. And again, the how, just like why should we register in this case, just like that is specific to each type of case, the how do we do it? What's the actual process? What paperwork do we need? Who do we call? That's also different for each type of case, which is very frustrating, but it's the case. There are two types of recognitions, or two ways the state court will recognize a tribal order. You may see these terms full faith and credit, and you may see a term called comity or comity, depending on who you are and how you pronounce it. I say comity. But full faith and credit is United States law that says that the state has to treat the tribal order just like it would an order from another state, like Washington, or California, or Texas. It's easier to do it that way. It's more automatic. Comity is when the state gets to look into the order a little bit more. It has more discretion on whether it wants to register it or not. And whether the state court is going to apply full faith and credit or comity depends on federal law, US federal law. So I'll be discussing each type of case, and you'll see in each type of case that in some of them, there's United States federal law that says tribal orders of this type. The most common example is a protective order. Alaska State Court must give it full faith and credit. And then there are other types of cases, custody, divorce, where there's no law saying full faith and credit. So it's not as automatic. And the Alaska State Court has a little bit more freedom to do it at once, which makes it a little more difficult for a tribe to get those registered. Those terms are Western legal terms. If any Western lawyer tries to tell you that they understand the difference between those two perfectly, I wouldn't believe them. It is a complicated difference between those two. And I think we won't focus on those in this presentation because I think all it does is complicate things. I think we will focus just on each type of case and why you might want to get them registered, an order for that case, and how to do it. But I think it's helpful to know that what those terms generally mean, because you'll see them pop up. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. So I was going to start with kind of a bird's eye view of what the registration process is like. This is, remember, it's, as I have just been saying, it's different for each type of case, but the general process, just so you have kind of an arc or a timeline in your head, is that the petitioner petitions, asks the state court for it to recognize the tribal order. Anybody with a legal interest in the outcome of that registering will get notice by the state court. That means parents of minors, that means legal custodians, it means the other adult in the divorce, the person whose name is being changed. They will all get notice, even if you didn't give them notice. They will all get notice by the state court that this registering is happening, and then they will all have an opportunity to object to the registration. The state court wants to make sure that if they're going to register something and it affects other people, those people have a chance to speak up and say, I don't want this registered in state court. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And so part two of the bird's eye view is now the state court needs to decide whether it even wants to register it. And the most important thing the state court will focus on is whether everybody affected by that tribal decision, a tribal court decision, or even a council decision, whether all those folks were given reasonable notice that the case was happening, that a hearing was happening. They were given an opportunity to be heard. So they weren't just told, hey, it's happening on Tuesday at 9 a.m. They were told it's happening on Tuesday at 9 a.m. and you can come and you can speak. And that there wasn't any obvious bias by the tribal court or the council. You've heard these, I'm sure if you've done these trainings or other trainings or are part of this world, you've heard these things I'm talking about as due process. And the court will focus on that. The court will also look into whether the tribal order still stands or whether it's been vacated, meaning it's already not on the books anymore, or if it's been changed or modified. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So now we'll get into each specific type of case. And you'll see with each case, there's one slide that's going to say, should we register the case? And the next slide is going to say why, or excuse me, how to do it. So this is the why do it, and the next one is how. So I start with child protection cases. As I said, in state court, you see these called child in need of aid or China cases. In state court, the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, applies in these types of cases. I should point out here, though it's probably a conversation for another training, but the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, does not apply in tribal court. Child protection cases in tribal court. You got a decision, and now you're thinking, should we register this case in state court? And as you'll see on the slide, if you can see them, there are some reasons why you might want to register a child protection or China case in state court. The first is if you need state trooper enforcement help in an emergency. For example, some government agency or a parent or a family member is not following or respecting the tribal order. They're not listening to the tribe. They're not doing what the tribe decided. There's a specific example. A parent, a foster family, isn't making visits happen. They're just not letting them happen, even though the tribe ordered in its child protection case that visits by the biological parents need to happen. And a foster family is saying, nope. That's where the rubber hits the road sometimes with tribes. And you don't know what to do. Help from the state, from their law enforcement, may be a reason to get the order registered. Just another example, the tribe or a caregiver needs to apply for a PFD and needs proof that they have legal custody. It can be made much easier if the order is registered with the state. Those are just a few examples why you would want in a child protection case to register it. We can go to the next slide, please. So this slide says we decided to register. Okay, we want those benefits. We need trooper enforcement, or we need help applying for the PFD. How do we do it? The nice thing about child protection cases in state court, from tribal court to state court, is, and we mentioned it before, full faith and credit applies. There are specific rules for exactly how you register an order in state court. These are called child in need of aid rules. These are rules that apply to the state court. The state wrote these rules for itself, for its own courts to follow. So you could look those rules up if you're interested. But I will say these state court forms, they've provided the right, and I would say pretty, not too difficult to work with forms for following those rules that you just fill out, and it has the instructions on how you send it to the state court. And you can find those on the website that we maintain, alaskatribes.org, or you can find them on the court's own website. So that first website is alaskatribes.org for those of you on the phone and don't have the materials in front of you, or the court's website, courts.alaska.gov. You'll see on either of those websites the forms, for example, requests to register tribal court custody order and request for hearing about registered tribal court custody order. So that's actually a pretty straightforward process if you get those forms. So we can go to the next slide, please. And this is just a little bit extra information for child protection cases because they're so common, and child protection cases, unfortunately, are where so much tribal law and tribal state relationships are formed. So here are some examples of what a tribal order or the types of tribal orders that fall under what I'm calling child protection cases, or as the state calls them, child in need of aid cases, because these rules that I'm talking about, these China Rule 24 and 25, where you get these forms from our website or the states, these specific rules, this kind of straightforward process only applies to specific types of child protection decisions by the tribe. So common one is foster care placement. Without an order removing a child from a parent and placing them in the care of another person. For that type of case, something was happening with these parents, the tribe was concerned, had a hearing, made a decision that the kids will be placed with someone else for a bit. That's a foster care placement, and you get that registered with the state following these China Rule 24 and 25 and using those forms on our website or the courts. Another is just terminating a parent's rights. Another is what they call pre-adoptive and adoptive placement. And it's important to note that that does not mean an adoption decree. Pre-adoptive and adoptive placement just means placing with another before making a final decision on the placement. And this also does not apply to custody disputes, just normal custody disputes. Two parents maybe are getting divorced, or two parents who are not married, to have a set schedule for who makes decisions for the kid because they're separated and who the kids stay with. These rules wouldn't apply. That's a different process that I'll talk about. And however, it does apply to a tribal court placing a child with one parent over another if they find that that's the best way to keep the child safe in the child protection case. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So that was child protection cases. It's a pretty straightforward process. These child in need of aid rules, and there are forms on our website, alaskatribes.org, that you can use to register the decisions, and you get help from the state troopers, help with the PFD, etc. Now, domestic violence cases, these are protective orders. First question, should we register this case? Should we get a protective order registered? Now, this is interesting because under U.S. federal law, the Violence Against Women Act, registering is not required to get help from troopers. One thing I've been saying, I said it with the child protection cases, why register? Well, you get the troopers to help. With domestic violence protective orders, you don't actually even need to register to get trooper help. You can, under federal law, send it directly to troopers to get their help. However, If you've ever done this work throughout the state, you'll know that it changes trooper station to trooper station based on how they are following that federal law. It's something a lot of us here on this call are working on to try to change, but it's the reality on the ground. And so sometimes registering it instead of just sending it straight to the troopers can be helpful. Can be helpful in an emergency situation where you don't want to have to wait to see whether the troopers are going to accept it or not. And it's just helpful to, in general, to have the troopers be very sure the troopers, or at least more sure, troopers are going to be able to help enforce it, get the order to the person, use the order to keep somebody away from somebody else or somebody away from a building. And registering also puts the order in Alaska's central registry, which goes a long way in helping you make sure that the troopers will actually have a copy of the order available to them and are more likely to be able to enforce it. Also, if the order is registered and the person violates the protective order, gets too close to the person that they were supposed to stay away from, it's a state crime. That actually makes it easier for that person to be prosecuted in state court if that's something that you want. So those are some reasons why you might want to register a domestic violence order, which again is different from sending it straight to the troopers, which you can do. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, we decided to register, and how do we do it? This is a pretty straightforward process, or should be a straightforward process. Sometimes you might get some resistance, but generally you should make sure that your order shows that your tribe had jurisdiction over these people who are involved. Usually helpful there is to maybe even note the tribal citizenship of those folks involved, or exactly where the incidents happened, and show that the people involved were given due process, they're given notice and a right to be heard. And then the order itself has to have the tribe's name. It should be signed in the state court. It's going to go easier with the state court if it's certified. But all that means is the tribal court clerk can write, "This is a certified copy," and sign it. There's no need for a seal or a stamp. So you just make sure your order looks like that. It has the name, signed, certified, it shows due process. And then you fax that order to the closest court clerk. And you should do that with what the state calls a verification form, a DV-215. That's helpful if you're just looking for it online. And you can reach out to us, you can reach out to Tribal Justice AVCP, Alaska Native Justice Center, and we can provide you with that form and just walk you through the process. Then the state clerk of that court that you faxed it to has to register the order if it meets their requirements, and give it to officers for service on the person who's named in it, the respondent, the person who, not the victim, but the person who we're trying to keep away from someone else. So that's the process there. The child protection and domestic violence protective orders should be the easiest of all of these. Sometimes they're not. State court isn't always the most helpful, or they sometimes make it harder than it needs to be, but the process under the law is pretty straightforward for both of those. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So now we just did child protection cases, which means like foster care placement, placing or terminating rights. placing in the care of someone else to protect the child. We talked about domestic violence protective orders. And now we're just talking about adoptions, tribal adoptions in general. And you ask the question again, should we register? In this case, what benefits are we going to get from registering adoptions? And as I said, with the protective orders, tribal adoptions do not need to be registered with the state. It's not required to get help from the state. You can send it directly to vital records, as it used to be called, health analytics. And this will help the tribe get a new birth certificate for the child and the parent, which is the, I just did one of these recently for an adoptive mother. So it's just sent directly to vital records to get that benefit of a new birth certificate, a new Alaska state birth certificate. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we decided, okay, we want that new birth certificate. So how do we get it? How do we get the help from the state? There are two ways to do it. There are pros and cons to each way. The way that the state, the way that will make it easiest for you to work with the state is by filling out Vital Records' own cultural adoption packet that they have. And you can find that on our website, alaskatribes.org. That makes it easier to work with the state, but you need to get consents signed by both parents, by both the biological parents or whoever is the current parent. Or you can show that there was an exception, that one of those parents is deceased or was contacted, given notice, but couldn't be reached anymore. The second option is just your own tribe's adoption order, not using the cultural adoption packet. You just use a tribal order, and you still send that directly to Vital Records, or you could register that with the court if you wanted to. We have samples of those on alaskatribes.org as well. The benefit of doing it that way is it's your own order. You're not just following the state's forms because you're not required to do that. And you don't have to have both parents signing consent. You can just make sure due process was provided to both parents and send it in. But you might get a little bit of resistance from Vital Records with that, which I'm not saying is legitimate of them, but it's the case on the ground. So there's two options based on how you as a court want to do it. But for either option, you can go to alaskatribes.org. We have the forms for that, which you just send straight to Vital Records if you'd like to get a new birth certificate after the person has been adopted. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, now we have child support. A child support decision in tribal court. And we ask the question, do we want to register it in this case? What benefits will we get from the state by doing this? Why can't we just, as a tribe, just register have the child support decision made? The tribal court judges said, you two parents are splitting. You need to, one parent need to make sure that you're providing some sort of financial or services or goods support to mom or dad who's looking after the kids mostly. So why register that with the state? What help do we need from the state? Well, the state has a Child Support Services Division, CSSD, and they have unique abilities to enforce these orders if one parent is deciding not to pay. And that includes getting their wages, that includes getting their PFDs from the state automatically sent to the other parent. So Child Support Services Division can be of great help. Thank you. No, the next question is, how do we do that? The first most important consideration, if your tribal court is going to be, and hopefully this is in tribal codes too, I find it to be helpful in the codes, just so not everybody has to remember every time, but they can just read it on paper, that we should absolutely make sure that neither of the parents don't already have a child support order through Alaska state or another court. Because if you do, then a tribal court, a separate tribal order for child support gets complicated. And the order should have a specific dollar amount, or be very, very specific about what that support is. And there's no specific process for registering these with the state. It's not like the child protection cases, the China cases, which have their own rules and forms. It's not like the protective orders, where you have a specific way of sending it to the troopers or sending it to the court. And it's not like the adoption case, where you get to send it straight to Vital Records. This child support orders follow general comedy rules. So they just follow general rules for getting the state to register it. And when I say general rules, I mean there is no specific guidance from the state on how to do it. But Alaska Legal Services, AVCP, and JC can all help in providing forms and templates for petitioning to the court to register your child support order. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. And one other thing I will say about child support is that it actually can be a lot easier getting a child support order registered and working through Child Support Services Division of Alaska if you as a tribe have a registered Title 4D Tribal Child Support Agency, which is just to say that you've registered an official child support division of your tribe to do this work and work with CSSD. Now, there are only 2 tribal organizations in the state that I know of that have these. Aleutian Pribilof and Cleveland Haida's child support unit have this, but that could be available for any tribe if they developed their own child support agency and got approved for federal funding. So I just wanted to point that out. That, again, that falls on what I'm talking about as the future, that world we see in which the tribe has the resources to do this work itself and not need so much help from the state. Okay, we could move on to the next slide, please. And again, I should just say, because I do not want to make it seem as though any tribe needs this help from the state. This is merely whether a tribe has decided it wants it, based on its own view of its own resources and sovereignty. So it's completely just a decision of the tribe, just like it would be a decision of any organization or any nation to get a benefit from working with another nation or state. So the next case type here we have is name changes. First question is, should we even do it? Should we register it? This is helpful for getting a new birth certificate or a real ID from the state, or a new social security card with your new name. Now, the social security card process that would come from the federal government, Social Security Administration. So this is a pretty common one. We can move on to the next slide, please. And so how do you do it? Again, just like with child support decisions, there's no specific procedure. It's general comedy rules. It's not full faith and credit. So once again, and I know this is annoying or not satisfying, but you can reach out to us at ALSC, AVCP, or ANJC to help with forms or templates for petitioning the court to register the name change. We have done it. Not saying it's an easy process or straightforward, but we can help. Okay, we can go on to the next one, please. Custody and divorce case. Again, this is different from a child protection case where you're placing a child with somebody else for their safety. This is just two parents have decided they're separating and they want to have a clear schedule, a clear decision on who has custody of the child, or they're getting divorced because they were married and they want to have a clear decision on custody of these children. In those types of cases, which are very common in state court, the tribe asks, what benefits could we get from Alaska if we registered a custody or a divorce and custody case? One reason to do it is a tribal citizen is attempting to challenge the tribal court decision in state court. So the tribe made a decision, final order. One parent doesn't like it. Custody went to the other parent. Or this parent has to pay a lot in child support. They don't like how the decision was made. So they go to the state court and they open a divorce and custody case there, trying to say, no, state court, this is where we should have done this. If the tribe finds out that that's happening, or if you're working with the state court and they let you know, the tribe may want to register the decision it already made with the state, and it makes it a lot easier to show the state that there's been a tribal order, there's been a tribal decision, and that decision takes the day. There's also a situation where one parent just isn't complying with the child support, with the custody order, isn't giving the kid back on the weekends as the custody order required. Registering with the state can help the tribe get help from the law enforcement on enforcing that order. Or if a school or medical facility is saying, school is saying, hey, I need to see that you have custody, or a medical facility is saying they need it. I'm not saying that they're right to do that, but registering with the state court can help have documentation that a school or a medical facility is more likely to, or sometimes more likely to, read and understand. I'm not saying that's required, but again, this is just a decision by the tribe whether it will make things easy, whether they want to make things easier for the people in the case in this particular situation. Okay, we can move on to the next one, please. So, same question. It's getting old, I know, but I think it's helpful to see it this way. It's at least helpful for me when I do this work. We decided we wanted to register it. Now, how do we do it? Once again, no specific procedure in these types of cases. It's general comedy rules. You're asking the court to register it. You're showing due process happen, no matter what, even with these general rules, I should say. Even when there is no specific procedure outlined by the state, there is still the requirement for due process. They will look for due process. They will look that it was provided notice and an opportunity to be heard. The state court will look at that. The state court will also give notice to everyone involved, give them a chance to object to it. These will all happen no matter what. even in these types of cases where there are no specific rules, specific procedures. Those due process, giving folks a chance to challenge it, will still happen. Yeah, and like I said, come to us at ALSC, AVCP, ANJC, and we can help register that order. We can provide you templates. AlaskaTribes.org has templates for these general cases too. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. We covered most of the most common types of cases. I know that was a lot of information, I think, but I think it's helpful for everyone here, including myself, to see how the consideration, the decision by the tribal court and the tribe changes for each type of case based on tribe's own decisions, why they want to do it. Now in the future, which is this slide says the future, because it's thinking about how these rules might change or what might change, what might stay the same. And for all of those cases like divorce and custody, child support, name changes, for those types of cases where I said that there's only a general process, there's no specific instructions, the state has not provided specific instructions on that. For those types of cases, there is a rules committee, a state rules committee that has been meeting to create specific instructions for even those more general cases. There's folks in this meeting right now who may be on that rules committee. And when we get more guidance from them, when they make a final decision or some final decision on more specific instructions and rules, we'll let everybody know. And we'll put it on our website, we'll share it with, I'm sure AVCP will already know and share it with everybody, but when we know more about those, we'll provide it. But all we can do is, right now, is work in the system we got and push that system if the tribe wants to. That's something we can help with too, because some of these things I've described are frustrating and I would say don't necessarily follow federal law. And a lot of times it can take a tribe pushing for what's right to get a change by the state. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. I think it's the last one. Yeah, and here's my contact information. My email address in red and my phone number. I gave AVCP's Tribal Justice line. I gave Alaska Native Justice Center's general line. I'm sure you guys have folks who are on this meeting who work there have more specific contacts, numbers or emails that you could give. But those are the numbers that you have up there are the ones I use when I need help from them too. But feel free to reach out to me if you find that you have a general question or you just have an actual order right in front of you that you want to get registered. And that's it for my presentation. I'm open to questions if you got them.
Thanks, Clay. That was a lot of really good information. I hear a little bit of an echo, but I do want to open the floor first for any presenters that would like to add any information. So any of our presenters who are on the line that would like to add, if you're on the phone, press *6. If you are on the computer, there's the little microphone button.
Hi, this is Estelle. I really enjoy working with Clay, especially on these orders, because I think it's really important for us to understand, as small tribal courts, we may not always have the capacity. We don't always have like the employee resources. We may not have the human resources, like people in the office that can do these things, or we might not have very many law enforcement people in our village. Some of our villages do not have VPOs, VPSOs, or TPOs. And I really am a fan of registering all of these different types of cases with the state for several different reasons. One of them is that capacity reason. You know, once we register something with the state, we have a big teams of people that work for the state that are helping us to make sure that these orders are enforced. If we register a protective order or an adoption order with the state, it's documented multiple times. You know, if something happens to our documentation, like in the village, you know, occasionally we'll have like fires or something that happens, flooding or whatever. And so we have copies of these documents in other places with other agencies. And I think that's so important, especially when we are looking at the protection of vulnerable people, whether they be family members or children. They'll also help us to get these protection orders or different orders to the agencies that are involved in helping us serve our families. If you have a divorce or custody order that's not being followed within your community, this can be taken to a state level and that person can end up going to court. And that's like really important, that our people are protected and everything. Another thing that this does, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is how I see it, but one of the things that I think is most important about this is when we register these orders with the state is recognizing our authority as a sovereign entity. We have that sovereign power over our tribal members and the people that belong to us, I guess. So they're acknowledging that we have this authority to put these things into place. And it's helping us to teach both the state and also even in the federal government that we have this authority to help protect and take care of our people. And that's really important. More and more agencies, like Clay said, sometimes the state troopers do or don't enforce orders if we just send it to them. If we send it through the courts, if we register it through the courts will actually send a copy to the troopers. I think both like the main and then the detachment, whatever detachment serving your area. So there's a lot more documentation. There's a lot more capacity with people that that's their primary job, is to do these things. And also, you know, you have tons of documentation. So that's my big that's why I like having orders registered. Because as a small tribe, working for a small tribe with just less than a handful of people in our court, it's important that we have as much support as we can, because we're not always just dealing with what, you know, that particular order. We may be dealing with other things in the village, or we're dealing with our council. So it allows us to get that support when we might not always have the ability, the capacity to do it.
Thanks, Estelle. Those are all good points. I love the point about the paperwork. It sounds so, you know, I don't know. It's so important. I'll just say, you know, where sometimes there's paperwork gets missing, or as you said, with the flood, or gets damaged, etc. And at least it's in the state court system too.
Yeah, and especially with some of those orders, they're very time sensitive, and the deadlines need to be followed, and they need to be served within a specific amount of time, and there has to be a response in a specific amount of time. So the state has the capacity, they have the ability to make sure that those things happen also. So it's a win-win, I think, for us, and we have the additional help on hand for enforcing them.
Yeah, great point.
So I noticed that, Rick, your microphone is open. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Denise. Clay, I want to first say thank you for your presentation. I thought it was well thought out, really greatly organized and really easy to understand. And I kind of want to echo some of the things that have been said, particularly about DVPOs and what Estelle and Clay has already said. You know, some of the benefits surrounding DVPOs is how they're entered into the state system when they're registered. Similar to what Clay and Estelle have said, when you register with the state court system, the state court is not only required to serve it if service is necessary, but they're also required to automatically forward it to state law enforcement professionals who are going to enter in the ABSIM database as well as the central registry. So I think that's really important. And what that does, it requires or it enables the victim to not have to carry around a tribal DVPO in order to get enforcement and assistance from state law enforcement. So if your tribal DVPO is not registered with the state, then in order for a state law enforcement officer to enforce a tribal DVPO, the victim is going to have to carry around that tribal DVPO with them at all times when they're seeking enforcement. So when it's registered with the state courts, then the law enforcement officers will be able to pull that DVPO up in their system. And so that kind of alleviates that problem of carrying around a piece of paper that can get damaged, that can get wet, that can get lost, even if there are protections that are ordered for a victim. If they're unable to show that, then law enforcement are likely not able to do anything on that. So that's the first point. The second point I want to make is on tribal adoptions. Clay made a great distinction on the, the distinction between the courts and the Alaska Department of Health and Social Services. The court system specifically excludes tribal adoptions in their China rules when they're asking for the comedy recognition, and that's purposeful. It's because in Alaska, DHSS, or the Health Analytics and Vital Records, is the entity that's responsible for processing new birth certificates after tribal adoptions or after cultural adoptions. So there may be a benefit to registering that adoption order in state court, but the ultimate responsibility of issuing a birth certificate falls on Health Analytics and Vital Records, or what we all know it as Bureau of Vital Statistics. And so there have been some recent changes to the forms they use for cultural and tribal adoptions. So if you are looking to get a new birth certificate following a cultural tribal adoption, please reach out to ALSC, reach out to AVCP, reach out to us at ANJC. Because we realized earlier this summer that there are different documents that are being used currently that were not advertised on their website because of the data breach that the state experienced and the inability of anyone to find any meaningful forms on their website. So if your tribes are going through that process, save yourselves a lot of heartache and a lot of waiting times on the phone with Juneau and Anchorage, and give one of us a call, and we'll certainly be happy to help out.
Oh, I thought of one more thing when you were talking, Rick, about the additions, the amendments that you made to the comments, but both myself have made for Clay's presentation, and this comes to jurisdiction. Some of our villages only have they have like a limited jurisdiction with the tribal members within their village. My village, I made sure that our jurisdiction included the tribal members where they live or work, or anything like that. But not all villages think that far, right? They just deal with the people that are within the village, the confines of the village. And once you register with the state, it's kind of like expanding your jurisdiction. Am I right? I mean, that allows the state to kind of step in where we can't.
Well, it's a good point, Estelle. It's a good question. So I would say that as the Alaska state or the U.S. federal government sees it, tribes in Alaska have jurisdiction over their members wherever they are. It's always possible for each individual tribe to, spell out its jurisdiction in a more specific way if it would like to. But from like a base level, as far as the state or the federal government sees it, you have that jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for tribes before where they had jurisdiction on just the people that lived within the territory. So like Knight say they will only deal with the stuff on the, I mean, they'll work with the children's stuff pretty much anywhere. But when it comes to all sorts of stuff related directly to the tribe, they'll deal with it there. And you cannot maintain, some of the tribes will not allow you to maintain membership within the tribe if you do not live on tribal land. Right. That's another thing too. So.
Yeah, and so I think you bring up a very good point. You know, land-based jurisdiction is more common in downstate tribes where they have reservations. In Alaska, the Alaska Supreme Court said, you know, that jurisdiction of tribes is based on people in Alaska. I think it's a great point you're making. I think you may run into some difficulty. Let's say if you have a tribal citizen who lives in Anchorage away from a Western Alaska tribe and who's bringing a DV petition against, let's say, a non-tribal member in Anchorage. You know, because then you're going to have, does the tribe have jurisdiction over that non-native person off of tribal lands to issue a DVPO against them? And I don't know that the answer is going to be yes. I think there needs to be sufficient connections to the tribe. There needs to be some kind of voluntary engagement with a tribal citizen that may be limited to tribal lands, but I'm not sure. I think it's an untested area, but I think that you are wise in advising that a jurisdictional statement be more broad and overly broad rather than limiting and less inclusive.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that when I've talked to and participated in other conversations about jurisdiction within in our territories or within our country, the more broad and the more inclusive it is as far as like our tribal members go, the better it's going to come out. Because if you look at the, you know, we had to redo our constitution to include that. When we did when we redid our constitution for our village, we made sure that our jurisdiction included the tribal members wherever they lived or worked, regardless if it was in Alaska in the village or not. We have tribal members in the lower 48, and because of our enhanced jurisdiction where we covered our tribal members, we were able to work directly with courts within the states that those people lived or worked in. And they recognized us as having authority because that was in our constitution, that was in our tribal code, you know. So they were able to say, okay, you do have jurisdiction, you are a tribal entity, you already have this in your tribal code, you have it in your constitution. So
yeah, I think that's a great point, Estelle. And when you define it broadly enough, you know, to the full extent of what you as a tribe see as your jurisdiction, it then is the decision of the tribe in specific scenarios to decide, like that scenario that Rick brought up, where you have a tribal citizen who's living far away and wants to bring, you know, protective order against maybe a non-tribal citizen, non-member. The tribe gets to make its own decisions in that specific case as to what it wants to do, how far it wants to push, whether it wants to get something registered in state court in that scenario based on what the tribe wants to accomplish. So you haven't limited yourself before you've even started. You have your power, and then you get to kind of decide how far you want to go with each case. I think we had to do a cross state tribal protective order. And we registered it in Alaska, but it also went to another state down the lower 48. And it worked really, really well. It was fantastic for our tribal member. It really helped them. And, you know, because it was registered in multiple states, it was recognized in multiple states.
Right, and that's a great point. Estelle, you know, that falls directly under the purview of VAWA. So any tribal protective order is entitled to full faith and credit. I think that's a great point. So if it's registered in Alaska, you know, victims have the ability, or the courts have, your tribal court has the ability to register in any state court in the United States simply by forwarding an unexpired valid tribal protective order to that state and asking, you know, for it to be registered following their procedures. Even if it's not registered in the state of Alaska, tribes can still do that, let's say for traveling to Texas, to Florida, to California, wherever the victim may be going, and that victim is afraid and needs the protection of the tribal DVPO under VAWA, it can be registered anywhere.
Yeah, and I think Rick brings up a good point for everybody. My presentation, I used Alaska State because that's the closest, state government we have that we're dealing with. But these rules, like some of these rules are specific to Alaska State, but some of them, registering with a state court is about a decision from a tribe on who you want to register with based on the benefit you want to get from it. And so if you have a situation where your tribal member is moving to another state, traveling, those same questions apply. Why register it? What benefit do we want? How do we do it? And then those could change. Those could be equally applied to getting it registered in another, getting the benefits that another state can have. It's just the tribe's decision. And then it's helpful for each tribal court or council to kind of work on a process of how to make that decision. Who makes that decision within the tribal court? Is it the tribal administrator? Is it the tribal court judges? It's a conversation to have, I think, so that no one's just hoping someone else will make the decision, or at least it opens up the discussion.
I just wanted to leave some time for everybody to provide their input. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rick, Estelle, Clay, for the presentation. Now I would like to open the floor to any participants of the training today. If you have any questions or comments for any of our presenters or Clay as our presenter for today. And remember to press *6. Hi, go ahead.
I just wanted to remind the young clerks out there, the new clerks, not to get overwhelmed with all this information, because some tribal courts don't handle like divorces or adoptions or child custody. It depends on each court what they handle. So I just want to remind those new clerks not to be overwhelmed, and we have these contacts that we could call, like Clay or Rick Garcia. We have help out there if we have any questions. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Darlene. So definitely, like Darlene said, there are so many resources for you as tribal court clerks, as tribal court judges, just tribal court staff. There's a lot of resources out here for you. AVCP, ANJC, ALSC, a lot of acronyms today. If you need any of the contact information, AVCP Tribal Justice is happy to connect you to whoever you need connecting to, or we're happy to help you ourselves. That's what we're here for.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I have a situation where two children were pretty much raised with their grandparents, and going through an adoption, and one of the days they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, where they got the children under OCS, and they're still not adopted yet. Just that one time incident. Now they're and then we know that these grandparents raised them. We know now with that cultural adoption, there's a section where they're under, if they're under OCS or not, and of course we have to put it down because of that one incident, are now under OCS and they still live with their grandparents. and now we have to wait for the state to file a form to let these two go before the adoption goes through. Can we, as a tribe, file for the grandparents to adopt the children? Or do you understand what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Rick, you may have the same question as I do, but I think this really depends on whether there's still an open case in state court on this. Does OCS still have custody?
Yes, there is still an open case. So what we were waiting on was a letter of release. I'm thinking that's what it is.
Okay.
The other thing is regarding child support. I know in the city you do have a lot of jobs over there, and either parent can be cited. I mean, not cited. Go under child support. Now in Native communities, they have lack of jobs, but these men or women are hunters. Can we put in order for them to like give the family, like for instance, moose, or get them logs for the winter? That's kind of like a support to the family.
Hey, Darlene, I just saw this in the national, the Justice Conference for Indigenous Folks. And yes, you can. They were just talking about that during one of the sessions where you can write an order so many pounds of moose meat per person, or these many logs, or whatever that helps the family, during each season. You can write for that.
Yeah, and I think that there may be two issues going on. And Clay, correct me if I'm wrong. If there's an open OCS case currently, I want to address that issue first. So if the tribal court wants to do a tribal court adoption, and there's currently an open OCS case, I recommend that you talk to the AAG who represents OCS in the state court case, because and the judges they can allow for a tribal court adoption to go on simultaneously while OCS has custody of children in state court cases. But that's going to require some coordination between the AAG and all the parties in the China case and the judge to allow that tribal court adoption to go forward. The second issue I think you're talking about is child support. Depending upon your tribal court adoption laws, once the adoption occurs, if the parental rights are terminated, then you cannot require that the parents pay any type of child support to the adopted parents. But that's really going to depend on how your tribal laws are written and whether or not a tribal adoption terminates any parental rights of the biological parents or not. And Clay, I want to make sure that made sense and I said that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know if the question was specific, was about child support in general, like what can child support look like? And Estelle is absolutely right. It can look like whatever you want it to look like. The tribe can write that into their code how they want it to look. I will say you may have some issues if it's like goods or services. You may have some issues registering that, getting some help from Alaska's Child Support Services Division, because they only work in numbers, in my experience. But you have that freedom, just as Estelle said, to write that code. But if you are asking the question about child support with respect to the adoption, that would take looking back at your codes, looking back at what your codes say about adoption, because Rick's right. Like normally, I mean, when I say normally, how the state does it or how a lot of tribes do it, an adoption ends the previous parents' rights and creates new ones and does not allow for that extra tether of continuing to pay child support. That parental duty is severed.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Are there any more questions for our presenters today from the participants? Remember to *6 or unmute your little microphone button.
I got a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Are you guys in the same category with a tribe, over in like the Fairbanks Fish Commission? That would make the tribe more stronger or are we all in the same boat? That was my question.
I don't know that I'm understanding the question. I think that there are different entities that sit on the Fish Commission. AVCP does have a department that sits on the Fish Commission, but it's not the Tribal Justice Department. Am I understanding your question?
Yeah. I'm with the fish, fishing too, and I wanted to know if it could be more stronger if all the tribes were to, try and get a hold of the legal services with, the foreign countries that come around and, because it's our tradition, our fish are being taken away, and I think what I'm trying to say is, the Fish Commission and the tribes, I think they work together, but I think they should all, push through that. We know who to go to, but it's hard for us to do it alone. I think all the tribes, all the entities, should be pushing to stop the fishing and the industries that are, like the mining and stuff that's really affecting our fish. That was my question. Gabriel from another tribe.
Hey Denise, this is Estelle. If you want to give him my contact information, I can talk to him a little bit more about that. There's some things that are happening within our region with some different agencies, actually Alaska. There's a Longliners Association, like Canada Chiefs Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife Management are planning on meeting with the Alaska Board of Fish. But Denise, please give him my contact information. Reach out to Denise for my contact information. I can put you in touch with the right people.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Estelle.
And I'll just say, thanks, Denise. Sorry, Estelle, feel free to, if you wanted to reach out to us too, if there's any, because we have attorneys that can do a wide range of things, and if one person is affected by this situation that that we know of that qualifies, or if the entire tribe does, we're at the ready for anything, including this type of stuff.
Right. Well, there's the Kuskokwim Watershed Council, which does stuff in the YK region, but there's also a movement to get all the villages up and down the Yukon, regardless of region, to be involved in dealing with the Board of Fish, and we want them to hear Indigenous people. So
awesome. That sounds great.
Thank you.
So Gabriel, the Tribal Justice Department will send an email to the email that you registered with Estelle's contact information. Thank you, everybody. Just doing another call for any questions or comments from our participants. And please remember to *6 or unmute yourself before asking.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Keisha. I'm calling from Untitled Tribal Court. I was wondering if we have to, like, what paperwork do we have to, like, send in to AVCP, like, every single thing we work on? Like summons or court orders, any kind of paperwork. Do we have to send a copy of everything to AVCP?
No, you don't. Actually, AVCP doesn't, we don't want to see the details of your cases. We definitely want you to keep that confidential, and with your tribe, the things that you would want to reach out for to AVCP are for funding questions, tribal court assessment questions, if you have questions about your forms, if you need sample forms, if you have cases where you don't know what to do next, that's where you would reach out to us. We're working on other services that we can provide for our tribes so that more will be coming in the next year. But further, ALSC, Alaska Native Justice Center, and Estelle, who's a contractor, and we have a few other contacts that can help you out with other things, but you don't have to send AVCP. You don't have to send us anything. No case details or anything.
You.
Yeah, you're welcome. Are there any other questions for today? So hearing none, we are just about at our 3:30 cutoff time. And I say cutoff, I don't mean that we're going to get cut off. I just say that that's what we're scheduled for. If there are no other questions for today's presenters, I really wanted to thank Clay, you for the presentation today, and Estelle and Rick for jumping in. We very much appreciate all of the information and anything that we can get to any of our tribes. And if anybody has any other questions, if you're too shy to speak up, please reach out to the Tribal Justice Department. We want to help you in any way that we can. Our phone number is 907-543-8550. It's also in Clay's presentation material that we sent you. And as I've said throughout today's presentation, if you are looking to get connected with anybody from our training series, please reach out to us. We're happy to do so for you. With that, next week, we are going to host a panel of court clerks for week 9. So next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Look out for our information that will be sent to the email that you've registered with. Thank you, everybody. Have a great